Welcome everyone to another in the CFO Academy webinar series. Today is a slight change of topic, and it's come about through some suggestions as a result of the previous ones. So I actually thought we'd cover this today, and I've titled it Dramatic Results with Value-Driven Improvement. So today I want to share with you a method, one of many that we leverage, that has enabled businesses to deliver significant value, not just once, but in terms of an exponential program of change over time. This process helps target time, investment, and enable a change based on value, okay, rather than just general efficiency statements and stuff, but based on value, based on your organizational goals and objectives. And it's a quick and effective method to rapidly implement and focus your resources on value-driven change. It's about minimizing that time to value and getting the best out of your resources to meet your specific business goals. And like I said, if I put it in the corporate performance management context, we've used this method many, many times in organizations to literally target a program of change and cut months off CPM processes, and in cases it's directly attributable to the success and growth of those organizations. So that's what I want to share with you today, something that you can use within your own organization as well. So first of all, so going back to the previous slide as well, first of all I'd like to say that this can be used on a large change of program, a program of change. Something very ambitious in terms of the long-term goals of the organization, or a much smaller piece. What I mean by big change, let's refer to the professional advantage corporate performance maturity model that I referenced in the very first webinar. I won't go through everything here, but it looks at the corporate performance process improvement aspects of culture and organization, technology, and improving those processes within a framework, going from tactical to focused to strategic and pervasive, moving from things like lag to lead reporting, from inefficient decoupled annual budgets to immediate cycle time planning. And if I look at the role of the CFO within that, then we're talking about moving the CFO's presence within the organization from one of control to managing, to forming business relationships, to having those established in a holistic way in a strategic framework, to actually acting as an agent enabling the business to change in a pervasive way. So obviously if you're undergoing a program of change, working your way through that corporate performance maturity, then you need a way of structuring that. You need a way of targeting where you start and what you do along that journey to maximize the value and return from that. But it can also be used for much smaller change. Like in most cases, we will sit down with a customer and we will start to explore exactly what the scope and priorities are with any small piece of change. And it could be that, for instance, a whole bunch of different things that need to actually be addressed. Improvements in budgeting, reporting, scorecards, some forecasting, some dashboards. What we need to do is we need to be able to pick a path to maximize the value and return on that investment. And we've got to do it in your business terms. Okay? Even if I go to the scope of something like a simple budget model within a business, like I said, not large strategic change, but I just want to improve my budget model. Then that budget model might be a P&L summarization driven by salaries, budget expenses, but to a certain extent, we need to prioritize. We need to maximize the value against what your specific requirements are and in your terms in order to get the biggest impact with the minimum investment. And there's lots of observations that I would make when we actually go into an organization. Sometimes the objectives are kind of misdirected because they're not based on the business goals of the organization. I'll show you a method that actually helps build some consensus around that you can apply to actually create a roadmap for that change, whether it's big or small. So like I said, if you look at any piece of change, even just replacing a budget model, or for instance, a large program of change in that corporate maturity path, then there's a whole load of different issues and constraints. I would turn that round to be a positive language. There's a whole load of opportunities. Let's think positively about the opportunity. Within that mass of opportunity, what we need to do is we need to identify and prioritize the ones that deliver the biggest value. And that's one of the biggest issues I see time and time again within organizations, is there are so many opportunities. Effectively, you get sometimes stasis, or you, for instance, actually identify a program of change around something that doesn't maximize the value and give the biggest bang for buck within that organization. And this is an issue for small organizations and for very diverse ones as well. Somehow what we've got to do is we've got to pick our way through those opportunities to identify those that should surface first in order to create a path of change. So that's what we do. We use a road mapping exercise where the organisation maybe has a high range of scope and limited investment, or for instance a large program of change. This type of process helps, this road mapping exercise. We look at all those possibilities, and I want to share this process with you. I will go through an example of something that you can apply immediately within your own organisation that I've seen work time and time again. And this is about FAST as well. I would make the observation, PA is not an organisation that does just business analysis or road mapping for our main theme. Our main theme is delivering technology and solutions to address things. So we need to quickly facilitate an outcome in order to target our project resources as best we can for your organisation. Okay? So the type of activity I'm talking about today is done within days, often as part of a larger piece of change like an implementation of a budgeting solution, forecasting, process management and so on. Okay, it can be used for any type of change, but it can also be used within your own organisation to identify how you should move ahead. And like I said, we have used this time and time again for organisations moving from tactical to strategic within very short time frames, identifying the priorities and delivering on those outcomes within months. And I've referenced some of those case studies in some of my previous webinars. Obviously, we've got to do that to deliver in time and across a very large range audience of participants and stakeholders. So we've also taken bottom performers in certain of their corporate performance process cycles to high performers within months. So this process works, and again, I'll reference some of the case studies, but this is pretty average, basically, in terms of the return on investment that potentially an organisation get. Budgeting within 4 months to 1 month, running forecasts to 1 day. But how do we pick those as targets? How do we prioritise them? How do we get the business to understand that would be to provide the biggest improvement? We need a simple, effective, value-driven way to do this. So first of all, I'm just going to go through what those steps are, and I'll show you and demonstrate an example. I think the key first point I would make is we need to look beyond that classic statement of return on investment. I think that's actually important. We need to go beyond that. There are other goals, there's strategy to deliver on. And interestingly enough, I often ask, what is that within the early stages of any engagements? Sometimes it's not clear within that audience, but the reference points are very visible. They're in their annual report. They're in the strategy document. There are reference points everywhere. And if you start to define your problems and opportunities back to those reference points, okay, it starts to make sense, and it goes beyond the ROI. And I've just referenced here Sydney Catchment Authority. In dealing with them, I'm very impressed with how progressive they are in terms of aligning all their changes and performance management initiatives back to a restructure which frames basically against their strategy, which frames some specific key focus areas. And that program of change has led to substantial productivity outcomes and ability for them to operate in an increasingly competitive landscape. Sometimes I go to an organisation and those reference points aren't picked. It wasn't that long ago I went to an organisation, a very short amount of time. I brought with me their 5-year strategy plan, which I found actually online. And I said, look, I now get the context for your change. These basically drive your priorities. I've made these observations, and the stakeholders around that table weren't actually aware of this document. So do think about referencing it. So what if our process needs to look beyond return on investment? How do we do that? We've got a series of steps that we would actually do within a very short amount of time, like a 4-hour to 1-day workshop, an exercise completed in days with your key stakeholders. Well, we'd actually go through, and we go through these series of steps as an agenda for that particular activity, and I'll share that with you. So first of all, we have to define what success looks like within your organisation, and we have to rank it, which is something that's rarely done. And then we have to identify the different corporate performance management opportunities. It could be used in a much wider sense as well, and then start to prioritise. In fact, you'll prioritise. We assess some risk and define an approach, and then we've got a roadmap to act on. So I'm just going to go through an example. This is based on a fictional example, and I do that because the motivations, missions, and strategies of organisations are often something that an organisation doesn't really want to make public. They're happy to talk about the successes and achievements, but potentially the motivations behind them is their competitive strategy. So I'll come up with a fictional one, but it's very typical. So in here, basically, sat down with a group of key stakeholders, the leadership team of an organisation. We've looked at their mission, their strategy, priorities, all quite clear within the group. And I've asked them, what are the critical success factors about deciding what you'd move ahead on given limited resources? How do you prioritise? What are your motivations? And they came up with a number. And originally in this particular exercise, they started the engagement by telling Professional Advantage that the focus of their project was an improvement on their previous project reporting system, and it was about increasing accountability. But when we broke it down and we pointed it back to their mission and strategy, other things came out like improved commercial decision making and supporting contract retention and growth. Now if we ask that organisation to then rank those, interesting thing is that obviously the things that are closest to their mission and strategy start to surface, and those things that are potentially supporting or enabling or lower priority start to be very clear. And if we simply order those, then we get a very clear focus. So we'll now have a basis to actually prioritise particular opportunities against. Anything that clearly ranks highly against support, contract, retention is going to get more attention in the organisation. The external perception was referenced back to a regulator. It was a control thing. They had to comply with certain regulatory framework. But basically, while that was a factor, it wasn't as important in this particular case to contract retention and growth or improved commercial decision making. So that can be quite quickly done. We could then talk about all the different things that organisation really sees on the horizon. Now sometimes they're very clear about what they actually want to achieve, and sometimes there's a whole range of things. And even if they're clear about that single thing, it needs to be broken down again. And having identified all these different opportunities, we can still simply list them, and what we can do is we can start to rank their fit against any one of those critical success factors. So how close is triple bottom line corporate reporting to an improvement on the previous system? How close is long-term cash forecasting to actually delivering, say, a return on investment, or, for instance, to improving commercial decision-making. Now, if we then just order those in terms of the one that more closely aligns to what the critical success factors are, we're still going to get a sense of priority. Now, the nice thing about this is it builds consensus. Within a very short amount of time, with a wide range of stakeholders, you can get to some position on this. And it potentially be checked and validated post-workshop, but it definitely provides a clear position to actually start engaging in some decisions. And what I like about it is that, you know, we've seen this change the direction of a specific workshop from things like efficiency to effectiveness statements, from, you know, things like, oh, I want a cross-departmental win. So wait a minute, we actually want improved commercial decision-making. In other words, we're actually starting to talk about value in the business rather than, for instance, some of the sort of smaller considerations, which are still important, still significant. As you can see, they haven't been lost. They're just weighted. The next thing we would do in this workshop is we would consider complexity and uncertainty. We're now going to make a judgment in terms of how complex things are and how certain we are of them. And I use a very simple matrix for this. And you consider it as a matrix with two axes, uncertainty on one and complexity on the other. And if we start to map out those particular opportunities within this matrix, we start to get an idea of how we should approach them. So, for instance, something is relatively certain, it's very clear, it's not complex, so I consider it a quick win. Behaves a little bit like a dog, it's very predictable. So we'll kind of give it a nice classification and work on an animal analogy, if you want. And look, in order to achieve that, you know, in its own right, it's not going to actually probably make a business-changing event within your organisation. But if you do enough of them, potentially they can make a significant improvement. And in fact, 1% changes over time are definitely an improvement strategy that's been very successful with some of our organisations we've worked with. And there's a very clear reference point within the organisation. There's a lot of certainty. I can probably pick up a reference point, talk to someone, act out on it, and implement something around that in a very short time frame. If I move to things that are quite uncertain within the business, but not very complex, they tend to be things that are relatively new to the organisation. You know, a new reporting requirement, a new policy, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about how that's going to be taken on by the organisation and what it means for them. So in that particular case, it's not considered complex, but basically we need a kind of an adaptive way to actually deal with that in terms of an implementation approach. We need a bit of show and tell, we need a few sort of improvement loops, and that's the way to handle those. A cow analogy is a complex beast, but it's relatively docile. It's low certain, you know, yeah, it's quite certain within the organisation, but it's quite complex. And these tend to be the core things that you're about. Corporate performance management. We're talking about corporate performance management today. You know, the key things that basically are around the key processes that you've done maybe for years and that you have referenceability within the organisation. You have knowledge about what things are required. There's an as-is state within your organisation, a detailed definition for us to actually investigate and to address that complexity and break it down into a program of change and deliver an outcome. And then we've got what I call a bull. Bull, highly uncertain. So you've just got this notion. So the executive got this notion that basically there's this very complex thing, but they don't know too much about it. But basically, you know, the thing that they actually want to achieve is in that quadrant. So I would say that, you know, if something is important enough, it should be dealt with. I'm not just about addressing quick wins. So what we need to do in that approach is we need to actually use a discovery process to break that down into smaller change, identify exactly what it is and reposition it and actually tackle it. So what we can do then is plot those different opportunities into this matrix. We're starting to actually define what we know about it within the organisation and actually start to define an approach. We can then summarise that as we've got our ranked candidates. And you can see that ranked candidates start to indicate the project profitability forecasting. What-if analysis for executives are the primary things that the organisation sees as most value within the organisation because it delivers amongst those outcomes. Things like the triple bottom line corporate report, less so to the bottom. And things that really potentially touch fewer people, like detailed salary planning, corporate departmental budgeting, start to kind of fall away, and we start to focus more really on the longer term perspectives that the organisation wants in order to do what-if analysis or model their changing environment in this particular case, and look at things like profitability. But we also got an understanding of how complex and how certainty that particular group of stakeholders feels they are about these things. And we can start to develop an approach and create a roadmap. So project profitability reporting in this particular case, you can see here. Okay, it's definitely worth doing. Recommendation is do now. It's complex, but there's very little uncertainty. So to a certain extent, let's break it down to smaller change, do detailed definition, rapid implementation. These we need to start planning for. The what-if analysis for the executives, considered important enough to drive commercial growth in the organisation in this particular case. But the approach and the complexity and uncertainty means that really we need to take a continuous improvement loop and monitor that and potentially sit down with the executive and allow for several iterations of that before we actually realise that particular component of the project. And so on. You can go through down this. You can actually see that in some cases we're looking for opportunities to move things up, like the project summary and KPI report here. Still a good fit in terms of critical success factor, but it's relatively simple. So if we have an opportunity in terms of resourcing, it's an easy win. Let's move it forward. And these, let's just maintain the current course. Now the nice thing about this approach is it can be used time and time again. And as things come up within the project, that basically need to be prioritised alongside this, the same framework can be used. And the nice thing is that organisations can apply these methods with or without us in terms of an ongoing framework while it provides a roadmap for us implementing the original solution. And like I said, this process has delivered some dramatic results. Small-scale projects to large-scale projects and programs of change. I'll give you an idea of how it culminated. This week I went to a Gartner summit in Sydney. Gartner is a world-leading research, IT, innovation organisation. And Gartner have recognised recreational services, one of our clients, as being a leading case study. And they presented to a large audience of Australian businesses, APAC businesses indeed, and their case study is now on the world stage. And they took this approach with us, and they used this approach every now and again to revisit their priorities and so on. And as they've said, and they're a PA case study as well, this process has helped them, it's challenged them, it's maintained that all basically the initiatives have been aligned back to value, and they consider that we kept them in the game. And obviously they're a large part of their success as well. We're just an enabler, but they see that relationship with PA and these approaches and the type of technology that we deliver on has given them year-on-year growth and has helped them win major contracts. And that's really what corporate performance management is about. So, just a quick reminder, like I said, all change should be value-driven. If you frame it in those terms, then you can deliver on those terms and rapidly. So I'm just going to go to the question panel, just a quick reminder, and just check whether it's going on. Let's have a look. Okay. Okay, got a couple of questions. There was a question here, it's probably made earlier than the statement that I made at the end about certain organisations taking this on, but the question is, this approach looks easy enough for an organisation to take on in their own right. Is this the case? Yes, that is the case. We'll often use it with an engagement with an organisation. It's the first time they probably share this approach. Some organisations have their own approaches. Some organisations are very clear about where we should start. So it needs to be used appropriately. And we have other techniques that can be used as well. But where it's relevant and we apply it, then the organisation sees that basically they have a larger program of change. They've gone on to use that within their own organisation as a simple method of incorporating new ideas and actually aligning them back to what the business is about. And indeed, those organisational objectives and priorities can change at any one point in time. So everything can be revisited. And it's quite a simple, what I like about it is it's a very simple framework. It doesn't over-analyse the situation, and it borrows from the tacit knowledge of the stakeholders involved. The other question I've got here is, how do we go from this to the solution itself? I put that ACT statement as the next step. Like I said, we've used this method to go from a standing start from a workshop, say in October, to delivering an outcome in, by the end of that particular calendar year. So what we're talking about is the next step might be a design and then an implementation. We use an iterative approach to actually share how we're delivering that value, and then we actually deploy it within your organisation. So yes, the next step is the action and implementation itself within your organisation to achieve the result that you're seeking. So, thank you very much for spending time with me today. Like I said, we've covered a range of topics now. There's actually a seminar next week, and then we'll be revisiting the topics for the webinars as well. So there will be an ongoing program, and we'll share that with you. Meanwhile, you can join the LinkedIn organisation, CFO Academy Professional Advantage, and if you want to hear more about Professional Advantage, the case studies, our solution, technology and methods, then do email us or phone that number. And we're always looking for ideas. Like today's came as a result of suggestions, so thank you very much for that. And I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.